Research can't be a matter of the ivory tower sort of marching into a place, dropping in from on high, and telling people what their lives are about. We have to involve the people we're studying in that work and make sure that those underrepresented communities are peopling our classrooms and are building the scholarly resources to become the agents of change and understanding for themselves.
I'm Dr. Lamont Repillette, the president of Kean, New Jersey's Urban Research University. This is Urban Impact, a podcast where we examine the complex issues facing urban communities through meaningful conversations with scholars, community leaders, and others who are driving change. Recorded and produced on our campus in Union, New Jersey, this is Urban Impact.
Welcome to part 2 of our conversation on urban impact with Dr. David Birdsell. If you missed any of part 1, I invite you to go back and listen to what was a thoughtful and interesting introduction to what this podcast is all about. Let's jump right back into the conversation with Barbara, Mike, and Dr. Birdsell.
When I think about your background, 35 years in New York City, Barbara, your background, decades of working with urban mayors and critical issues. I've worked in urban community for more than 25 years. So this is passion for me. But where does it begin? How does it start? How do we begin to actualize it on a campus? You know, from the provost perspective, how do we start tackling those tough issues that students really care about and that really matter to those urban communities?
Well, I think there are a number of ways to look at this, and let me separate here, and I'll bring them back together again in a moment, the research mission and the academic mission, with the latter meaning our degree programs, our certificate programs, what students actually study. So starting with the research, we can begin by tackling questions, as indeed we already are, that respond immediately to the urgencies of the communities in which we're situated and which by mission we face. So thinking about small business and the 2 small business centers that we have at Kean University to help people achieve economic success and better leverage assets such as federal government investments that can be made to benefit communities here in New Jersey. As we think about our increasing interest here in resilience, whether that's the resilience of coastal areas in the face of climate change, whether that's our ability to maintain our water systems, freshwater systems throughout the state, our transportation networks, water-based and rail-based, that these are all profoundly urban questions, which we now have scholars studying. As we think about how it is we take the enormous economic energy that's represented by New York City, and that of course spreads throughout this 24 million-ish tri-state area population, as we think about the $2 trillion in economic activity that it generates, and the enormous proportion of that with respect to physical goods that comes through the seaport at Elizabeth. We have a wonderful opportunity, and indeed scholars now taking advantage of the opportunity to think about the queuing and staging process, how it is that we circulate those economic benefits so that it's not always a matter of figuring out how you can get the cheapest home closest to Manhattan for that commute, but to actually stimulate the production of economic benefit where you live and distributed more equitably through the region. So it's a research project that has ecological dimensions, it has human organization dimensions, it has institutional dimensions, and it has quality of life dimensions. And we see that in the work that we're doing with regard to studying pandemic, with producing antivirals in our genetic research laboratories across the whole spectrum of these activities. So that's the research dimension of it. Now, in terms of the academic program, we need to prepare our students to participate in all of those processes and to think about how it is that they become able not just to frame questions, but to frame them in rigorous ways that are susceptible to answer through research, and that will benefit them in their careers. So we're in the process right now of taking our general education curriculum and pivoting it toward urban experience. Again, valuing where students come from. Like, we care literally where you get up in the morning, where you get on the train, and where you get off it. And what have you seen with regard to the environment? What can you collect in the form of data that we can then analyze in a laboratory that will help you better to understand that environment and the differences between suburban townships in New Jersey, very urban areas in New Jersey, very rural areas in New Jersey? How does that context differ in terms of the hard numbers that you're able to glean from air samples, water samples, soil samples, in a state that has plenty of challenges with regard to brownfields and contaminated sites right in our area, but other places that are not burdened with that kind of environmental legacy. So we give our students the opportunity to study majors that look like majors elsewhere, but are inflected by this very experiential quality and the ability to launch their own inquiries in their coursework so they really come up to speed, so that we join then the research that I described a moment ago with the academic programs that accelerate careers and allow students to realize their passions in their lives beyond college.
You know, Barbara, I just keep thinking about interviewing a Kean student for a job in the future. You know, from my previous life, and just sitting down, you have these canned questions that they go through, and the responses are all pretty similar. But to be able to kind of give a story, a research project that really matters, that kind of lights up the whole room. And I just think, like, how do we, as people with advanced degrees, go back and be undergraduate students here at Kean? Because what you're talking about is so exciting, especially for the workforce. It's great.
Mike, I would agree. I think it's an extremely exciting opportunity for students who are coming into a workplace that does not just want the bachelor's degree designation, right? That they're looking for individuals who understand simple social skills and who can engage in communities and who can work in teams and problem solve. And I think that we've kind of left problem solving on the table for so many years. So I hear what you're saying, David, and I think it really is a comprehensive way of thinking about education, particularly undergraduate education. But I have another sort of slant to that question, right? For communities, as we're talking about urbanism and engaging in spaces where there are underserved communities, and we're looking at issues and trying to problem solve with those communities on those issues, how do we ensure that the university maintains its consciousness and ethics around dealing with populations that have been underserved? Because we know that for those populations in the communities where Kean exists, that for many years, many decades, the people who live in those communities feel that universities are takers and not givers, right? It's the university that's the ivory tower sort of experience, as opposed to the anchoring experience that the communities face, and the experiences of those individuals as we think about urban research and impacting those communities.
If I had to boil that down to one word, it would be involvement. That we want to involve people from those communities in all of the processes that we're talking about. Research can't be a matter of, to use the language that you just used, the ivory tower sort of marching into a place, dropping in from on high, and telling people what their lives are about. We have to involve the people we're studying in that work and make sure that those underrepresented communities are peopling our classrooms and are building the scholarly resources to become the agents of change and understanding for themselves. That's an important commitment. There are all kinds of technical answers that I could provide you too with regard to human subjects committees, making sure that people's privacy and their data are protected in important ways. And that's critical. And I'm not trying to gainsay the importance of that work. And we have a wonderful forward-thinking IRB, that's the committee that stewards those kinds of operations, an institutional research board, that makes sure that human subjects are protected. But it has to be platformed on something that's more meaningful, that's more from the heart. And I think that involvement principle is an absolutely critical one. If we think too about who our students are disproportionately first-generation college goers, not quite a majority, but very nearly a majority of our students. They are, in many cases, first-generation Americans. They're relatively new to this country. Either they migrated themselves or their parents did. And so when we give them opportunities, they may very likely be the first people in their families to go to college. And if that's the case, by giving them all of the tools that we're talking about, we empower them, we empower their communities, and we make sure that those perspectives are at least participating in, if not in many cases, driving the analytical agenda, the research agenda, and ultimately the academic agendas. One of the things that I would be so excited about at Kean University, and I think we're getting there, and we're seeing some fruits of that, even just within the last few years with people enrolling in doctoral programs, et cetera, we have an opportunity to craft the next generation of academic leadership in the form of people getting doctorates and joining the professoriate and themselves going on to shape what universities do. We are not an ivory tower at Kean, and we are proudly not an ivory tower. We are in this community, of this community, for this community. And by community, I mean very broadly, certainly the immediate adjacencies that we have here in Union County, but all throughout New Jersey and all throughout the United States. If we think about the opportunities that we have to look at cases that are unique to our circumstances, but that provide lessons and paradigms that can spread all across urban areas throughout the United States. And that's exciting. That's empowering. I think that answers a large part of that question about underrepresentation historically and here in the present day.
I would agree. And I love the approach of ensuring that the people who are living in those communities, come from those communities, are part of the solution. So I love that.
So what about narrowing it down? What if you had to pick one issue, like a key issue in urban communities, what research would be most impactful to assist with maybe solving that problem?
Oh, heavens, Mike. I don't know if I can just pick one. Can I have two? Can you give me two?
Yeah, we'll give you two today.
So let me give you one clear example. Here in Union County, we have one of the lowest ratios of primary care physicians to population in the state of New Jersey. We have about 66 primary care physicians per 100,000 population. And compare that to a county like Middlesex, where it's about 94 primary care physicians per 100,000. So it's much harder for people to get access to health care. Trying to understand what has constrained access to healthcare, A, trying to understand what the effects are on individual, family, and community health, B, trying to think about what interventions provide the most rapid, effective, and economical alternatives to that primary care physician shortage, which, let's face it, isn't going to go away overnight. So how do we think about leveraging the clinics that we have here in occupational therapy, in physical therapy, in speech and communication disorders, et cetera, to think about ways to collectively understand more about these communities, their health status, which we know to be underserved and understudied, and then make those studies available to public policymakers, to hospital administrators, to others who have the responsibility for healthcare provision. That could be an enormously important contribution. And I think quality of health, particularly as we emerge from pandemic, please let's be emerging from pandemic, becomes an absolutely critical access of equity and a huge impact that we can have on this community. The second area that I would raise is environmental sustainability, and sustainability in all of its dimensions. We saw in embracing and terrifying form on what was literally my first day of class at Kean University on September 1st of 2021, Hurricane Ida, which alas took the lives of a couple of dozen of New Jerseyans, but also wiped out huge portions of the transportation infrastructure. And that was a very short storm, but it had terrific impact here in northern New Jersey. And we got to see in stark relief the absence of sustainability, sustainable architecture, sustainable transportation systems. If we could build that back in, Barbara, your colleague, Dr. Nikki Sheets, has been doing terrific work for decades now in environmental sustainability and in environmental justice, and the inequitable distribution, both of resiliency investments and of things like Superfund sites, et cetera. But let's think about how it is as a university we can contribute to the sustainability of communities and elevate among our students and everybody we talk to the importance of ensuring that sustainability so that we have a more livable state, a safer state, and a more equitable state over time. I think those would be two very, very important areas of intervention. But I could talk about economic improvement. I could talk about transportation systems. There's so much work here to do, and all of it is exciting.
David, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And the Watson Institute at Kean has been engaged for over 30 years in those examples that you just gave, right? Environmental, health and health policy and health systems, transportation, economics. And what we found is that there are a number of universities, a number of colleges, all trying to either vie for this space because it speaks to getting students through the door maybe, or changing graduate programs and looking at how they're responding to the various needs of community. So how does Kean lead? How do we ensure that with this urban research designation that we're seen as the leader in the state and the region for these issues that you just raised, to ensure both that we're leading in terms of the collaboration that should happen in this space for real change? And then how are we ensuring through evaluative measures that we're making change, and we're making impact, and we're putting the right education and qualified individuals into the field to make the changes that you just talked about? How does that happen?
This is a complex proposition that you're laying out here. And we're talking about what needs to happen over a period of years, decades even, not just a single administration, not just a single generation of academic leadership. But let me say, I think that the key issue here is sustainability. And I'm not talking about environmental sustainability. I mean programmatic sustainability at the university level. There are indeed dozens, arguably even hundreds of universities that are trying to get into this urban space. And what I've seen over a great many years is that the universities get in, but then the mission shifts and either individual programs fall apart or that commitment to urban experience falls apart. The University of Chicago was founded as predominantly an urban-focused institution. Stanford University, Harvard University at the end of the 19th century talked about their civic role in trying to elevate whether it's the quality of governance or the quality of policy making. That wasn't language that was particularly salient at that time, but they had those commitments, but they drifted up toward elitism. There's a tremendous pressure in universities to climb up the U.S. News ranking, to climb up the Shanghai Global University Index, and often that comes at the expense of the ability to pay attention to community. What I want to see for Kean in 15 years would be a Kean that is even more committed to and invested in community. And I think those outcome measures are several-fold. I mean, one is looking at the actual our ability to comprehend new issues, both diagnoses of problems and recommendations of evidence-based solutions and what the uptake is. So there's a kind of procedural quality to that. But then look at what difference those recommended interventions make in the lived lives of communities. But beyond that, thinking about the life cycle of the university. How engaged are our students in the community? How many community-focused internships do we have? How many service centers are working in the university? If we have small business centers, how many small businesses are taking advantage of that? How does that change the landscape? So if we compare Middlesex and Union counties, just to take one data point here, it is less likely that a woman will own a business in Union County than it is in Middlesex. It is less likely that an immigrant will own a business in Union County than it is in Middlesex. Could we bend those numbers? Could our small business centers take a particular interest in trying to elevate immigrant and women business owners in ways that are actually effective at changing those numbers over, and this is not an overnight thing, right? But over a 5-year, a 10-year period. And what do we look at? And those kinds of time horizons for trying to figure out efficacy suggest exactly how long-term the university's focus need to be. If you're just in it for one grant cycle and one project, you're not going to make that difference. It may make an academic career. It may give a professor the publications that he or she needs to achieve tenure down the road, but it's not going to make a sustainable difference in the communities. And I want to emphasize again the importance of involving those communities, because if you do that, and if you're serious about the reciprocal benefit, that it's not just a matter of the university extending its resources to a community, it's the university growing and becoming better because it's inclusive. If we can take that seriously and do it over a period of time, we'll be right where we want to be, and we'll be able to keep this going, not for the next decade, but for the next century. And that's where we really want to be.
Yeah, I think the reciprocal, relationship is key. And that, I think, is what keeps the ethos of the university and the community and keeps us moving down the right track. Thank you for being with us on Urban Impact today, Mike.
Oh, I think it was great. I learned something every time I talk to David and listen. So having you next to me, I'm learning from you as well. So what a great experience today. And I look forward to the next conversation we have.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks, Mike. This has been great.
Thank you for listening to Urban Impact, a podcast produced by Kean, New Jersey's urban research university. Subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get podcasts. For more information, visit kean.edu/urban-impact.